We are going to continue in Revelation chapter 6 this evening, and we'll finish up the remainder of this chapter. And this is the breaking of the sixth seal. And within this one, we're going to see that there's a lot of parallel in this particular passage we're going to study. By the way, this begins in verse 12 of chapter 6. But it's a lot of parallels between this and Jesus' teachings that we covered here a few weeks back in Matthew. But in verse 12 it says, "And I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. And the sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" Now, those last couple of verses, I think you, Merrill, had actually mentioned that this morning, that actually kind of rung a bell with you, something that we had read before, I believe.
Isaiah,
yeah. Yeah, in Isaiah. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about this, notice especially verse 16. Now we're going to take each of these a little bit at a time, but I want to drop down for now in verse 16. Notice it says, "They said to the mountains and to the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come." Now, if this occurs at the beginning of the tribulation period, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how did these people know at this point, during the reign of the Antichrist, that all of these events that were occurring, earthquakes, possibly a meteor shower, I mean, we don't know really exactly how that's going to be manifested, but a lot of commentators believe it's just going to be an overwhelming meteor shower, but earthquakes, and we're not, what's that?
Volcanoes, earthquakes.
Yeah, volcanoes, earthquakes, and notice, not just a little bit of a shaking, said, the land is going to be moved out of its place, and mountains and rocks, and it said, but the issue is, they say, that they're trying to run from him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Well, if the world during the tribulation period is worshiping the Antichrist, and many in the world are denying the existence of God and certainly of Christ, why then, at this point, in the breaking of the sixth seal, are they running from Christ?
Well, they're scared. I mean, if things are falling apart all around you.
I think you're missing the emphasis here. It's not.
They realize they're not saved.
Well, the issue is, who are they running from?
They're running from God.
All right,
and
but
his wrath.
what is going to be the theological or religious persuasion of people during the tribulation period with regard to Jesus?
They're not going to believe. They
Okay, now there you just hit it right on the head there. If they don't believe in Jesus,
Why are they?
if this occurs during the early part of the tribulation, say that louder.
Why are they running from him?
Why? It's not why are they running. Why are they running from him?
Okay, so
Because,
are they talking about the Antichrist then? No? Okay.
because they've
Nope.
taken the mark.
Makes it very clear. Says, hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb.
They chose
Now-
the
Coming
wrong
back?
one.
What's
They
that?
chose the wrong one.
Well, they did. But what difference would it make to them as far as who they're running from if they don't believe that Jesus exists?
Because is this when Jesus is coming back?
All right, now see, that's the key. A lot of people read through this, and here's one of the reasons again, and I reminded you of this last Wednesday, but we're seeing another example of it here. A lot of people read through the book of Revelation, and they think everything in Revelation is from point A to point B. It's all chronological. Well, clearly this is not chronological. Because as far as the overall timeline of the tribulation period, what are you seeing is occurring at this point?
That Jesus is coming back.
They see Jesus.
Yeah.
The great day of their wrath has come.
The great day of their wrath has come. We're talking about the day of the Lord, which occurs when?
End of the trip.
The end of the tribulation, the second coming. So the important thing to keep in mind in this, folks, is as we're reading this, not everything that John wrote is in chronological order. John is giving it in an order of what he considers is important and in the order that it's being presented to him. This is being presented to him as he's seeing the Lamb, Christ himself, breaking 7 seals, and we're up to number 6, 7 seals on this scroll. And he's describing what he sees and what's happening with each one. John never said, well, this happened first, this happened second, this happened third. All that we see chronologically is the breaking of the seals. As to what happens when we break those seals, folks, do not make the mistake of assuming that it's in chronological order of what people on earth are experiencing, because if you do, you're going to read that, and it's just going to totally mess up your mind trying to figure out when is this happening and what's going on and why are people running from the Lamb when, according to what we see chronologically speaking, the Lamb has not presented himself yet, because at the early part of the tribulation period, where is the Lamb?
Well, he's in heaven.
He's in heaven. This is describing a scene at the, as Bruce just mentioned, at the end of the tribulation period. And as we bounce back and forth, in fact, beginning in chapter 7, which we'll start on Wednesday night, we see what we might call in the story a parenthesis. John takes a break in his story and describes these 144,000 people, and then goes on in chapter 8 to talk about the breaking of the 7th seal. And I'll give you a little quick heads up on the 7th seal. With that opening, then that begins the blowing of the 7 trumpets. And then when we get to the 7 trumpets, the 7th trumpet, it starts yet another series of judgments that are poured out on the earth. Now, a lot of this may very well be in chronological order, but clearly not all of it is. And see, that's the reason I ask you, why are they running from Christ? If John were to be giving this chronologically, we've still got 7 trumpets and 7 bowl judgments yet to go. We'd still be in the early part of the tribulation period, and yet here they are running from Christ already when Christ has not yet presented himself. This is a description of the great and terrible day of the Lord, which, when does that happen? At the end. Now do you are starting to see one of the reasons why the book of Revelation is kind of difficult to get your mind around. Because how do we tend to think as Westerners in our culture? We think chronologically, and that is not how John has presented it to us. Now you see where I'm going with that?
Yep.
All right. Now I'm going to ask, if you will, keep your finger there on Revelation chapter 6, but flip back in your Bible to Matthew chapter 24.
It must have been a bunch of tree huggers or something.
Why is that?
Because they're worshiping, they're asking the rocks to help them. They're worshiping the rocks and everything.
Is that the Beatitudes?
Well, they're moving. You
Well,
know,
no,
and-
actually,
and
it's
it makes
to
you
hide them.
wonder.
It's asking the rocks to hide them.
Yeah.
They're worshiping the rocks to help them.
All right.
Matthew 20.
Matthew chapter 24. All right, let's see. Now, notice in verse 7, and this is Jesus who's speaking here. He says, nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and what?
Pestilence.
Earthquakes.
Earthquakes, yeah.
Now, what did we just see described in verse 16?
All the mountains moving.
Probably one of the biggest earthquakes the earth has ever experienced. Now, look over in Luke chapter 21. Flip forward a little bit.
Chapter what?
21. In Luke chapter 21, beginning in verse 25. Now we're going to go back and tackle the earlier part of this whole passage we just read. In verse 12, and let me reread that. And I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. We just saw that compared in Matthew chapter 24. And the sun became black as sackcloth, made of hair. The whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. Now, in Luke chapter 21, notice in verse 25, again, this is Jesus describing to his disciples the signs of the end. He said, and there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth dismay among nations, and perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves. Now, what you saw there, Jesus just summarized it. There's going to be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. Jesus just gave them a quick summary. John gave us the details. He said what's going to happen is the sun is going to become black, the whole moon's going to become like blood, stars of the sky will fall to the earth, which of course we know in verse 13, in all likelihood, how's that probably going to be manifested? What would make a man who really didn't know that much about astronomy 2,000 years ago think the stars were falling?
Meteorites.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
A really serious meteor shower. So stuff coming down all over the place. Now, why would the sun appear dark? What would cause the sun just to go dark?
An eclipse.
That's
But the only problem with an eclipse is how long does that last?
It would be the nuclear winter effect.
Yeah. An eclipse would only last a matter of minutes.
right.
Now, Bruce hit one thing. Say that louder, Bruce.
Like when a volcano goes off or a big meteorite, there's all sorts of stuff thrown up in the atmosphere, and you
Yeah.
get darkening.
All right. Larry, do you have a comment on it?
Okay.
Okay. So you got one of two possibilities, or maybe both. Bruce just hit on both of them. What happens when, of course, we've already seen there is a major earthquake. What is one of the things that happens or that could cause a major earthquake? Volcano. What happened in Oregon, what was it been, about 20 years ago or so?
That mountain. blew.
Mount
Oh,
St.
Mount
Helens.
St. Helens, yeah.
Mount St. Helens literally exploded. And what happened in the whole countryside and for hundreds of miles around that for months afterward.
Dust and soot or ash. So it just rained.
Yep. And it blocks out the sun. Another possibility, which Bruce also mentioned, and keeping in mind we've already been told in the breaking of the earlier seals what is one of the things that is going to be happening worldwide, that
War.
remember
War.
a fourth of the people are going to be killed. What is going to be killing them?
War.
War, famine, pestilence. If we're having a worldwide war of that kind of magnitude, what do you think is
Nuclear.
probably going to happen?
Nuclear.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
nuclear. So in addition to possibly volcanoes exploding, you're going to have multiple nuclear explosions. And let's face it, if one country gets involved in nuking another, what's going to happen very soon after that?
Everybody's nuclear.
Everybody's going to be nuking everybody else.
Yeah.
If the Soviet, well, I start to say Soviet Union, excuse me, Russia, Soviet Union's gone. Well, officially the Soviet Union's gone, but in reality, guess what?
Putin's still in control.
They're still there.
KGB.
They just put a new label on it.
runs the government now.
Yep. So if Russia launches a nuke against the United States, first off, we know that if they launch a nuke, what else are they going to do?
But they're going to be receiving.
They're going to launch them all.
I mean,
Russia's not going with a nuke; they're going to go with all of them.
And as soon as they launch,
And exactly in the half hour to an hour it takes for their nukes to get here, our air defenses will see them coming, and then what's going to happen?
restart.
We're going to launch all of ours.
Yep.
Then England, Israel, everybody else that sees that's going on. By the way, I put Israel in here for a reason, because I'll get to that in a second. When they see the United States being attacked, then what are all the other NATO countries that are nuclear powers going to do, especially England? They're going to send their nukes off.
You know, North Korea is going to.
They're going to get involved in it. Now, say Israel, because if Russia and the United States and England and a lot of the other nuclear powers get involved in it, do you think they might just save a nuke or two for Israel?
Iran's this close.
Uh-huh. Well, somewhere in the process, if Israel sees a nuke coming at them, guess what they're going to do? Contrary to what people, Israel has never confirmed or denied, to my knowledge, that they have nukes, which tells you what?
They got them.
They got them. You better believe they got them.
I thought that was a given. I thought Israel did have nuclear.
They've
And I
never
thought-
confirmed it.
Oh.
It's just one of these. We have no comment about that. What's that?
Playing their cards close.
Oh, absolutely. But everybody knows they got them. All right, now, so we got that. You figure there's probably going to be hundreds of nuclear explosions going on worldwide. Can you imagine the fallout, the dust, and the mess that's going to be in the atmosphere? Why do you think the sun, that John sees in his vision, the sun going black?
Because you're not going to be able to see
There
it.
ain't going to be any sun. It's going to be so obscured. And of course, also, what happens when, you've got this kind of nuclear fallout going on, the sun goes black,
Water, soil, everything's contaminated.
and look back what Christ has already done in the first 4 seals that he broke. So what you're seeing here is that while John is describing it to us as the first seal, the second seal, the third seal, it's all tied together, because the first seal that he broke, the Antichrist was loosed on the earth, and then the second seal was what?
That was the
War.
yeah.
Third seal,
Famine and pestilence.
famine, pestilence. What you're seeing here in the sixth seal is a description of the effects of the first 4 seals.
Okay.
And that's why, at this point, you've got a fourth of the world killed in all of this. Then also notice in back in Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, says the whole moon became like blood. Merrill, you're the astronomer in the bunch. What causes the moon to look red?
Refracted light around the earth when it's eclipsed.
But the question is, what would be refracting the light?
The dust in the sky.
There you go. All they're doing is they're seeing the effects, which on the one hand is causing the sun to be blacked out, will at the same time cause what you can see of the moon to look red.
And the sky was split apart like a scroll.
Mm-hmm.
Roll back.
That sounds like
Lightning.
nuclear blasts in the sky to me.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do it too.
By the way, one of the things that we haven't covered this particular passage, but the Apostle Peter, in describing this particular time in the day of the Lord, Peter also described that the day of the Lord would come in such a way as the elements would melt away with fervent heat. What would cause, other than direct intervention of God himself, what would cause the elements to melt away with fervent heat? Nuclear war. Stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree cast its unripe figs. Could be a meteor shower, but it also could be
The rockets.
rockets. John could be looking up and keeping in mind,
Explosions
what
in
did
the
I,
sky.
go ahead.
Explosions in the sky.
All right, what she just said. Kimberly's dead on. Remember what one of the things I told you to keep in mind when we first started this? John is describing to us in his vocabulary from 2,000 years ago things that he is seeing that are yet in our future. John doesn't have the vocabulary to describe nuclear war or explosions or modern warfare. So what John is describing to us as the stars falling from the sky, is it possible he's describing rockets and these nuclear, not just a nuclear explosion, but the missiles coming in as John looks up and he's seeing a vision of hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles coming in.
Missiles, sure.
What's that?
All MIRV missiles, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody see all those videos when Iran launched those 350 missiles?
I did. That's exactly what it looked like.
Yeah.
Yep, it did.
It did. I mean, they were, all you saw looked like stars, falling
Mhm.
stars, hundreds of them.
Wouldn't planets falling do the same thing?
Yeah, but the thing with the planets falling is where are the planets going to fall to? And imagine what would happen if a planet actually did fall into the earth. What would happen?
We'd just be gone.
Exactly. There wouldn't be any earth left.
Yeah.
And
If
we
a-
know
if a
that the
star
Bible.
fell to the earth wouldn't be here.
Yeah. If we interpreted this literally that a star fell onto the earth, yeah, before the star ever made it to earth, we would be annihilated. So you've got to keep that in mind, that what John is describing is what it looks like to him. This is not to be taken literally. Not that I don't believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible, but I look at it from the perspective of John trying to describe to us the best he can what he is seeing. And we know if it were planets falling, stars falling, if,
The whole solar
large
system.
comets and meteors were to strike the earth. Well, let's face it, this wouldn't be the first time a meteor has struck the earth. However, if a large meteor that would say we're a couple of miles across were to strike the earth, what was that? Yeah,
It's nuclear.
the force with which it would hit or even if it hit the ocean, wouldn't even have to hit land. If it hit anywhere on this planet, a meteor that was a mile or 2 miles across, it would hit with such force, and the energy release would be of such that humanity would probably be annihilated within seconds after that.
The one out in Arizona, it was 135 feet.
Mm-hmm. So we know that's not going to be the case because, well, there's going to be judgments poured out on the earth, but the earth itself is not going to be annihilated until the end of time, when it says that God himself will do away with the heavens and the earth as they currently exist and create a new one. So we know that cannot be the interpretation, or we wouldn't live to see any of that. Nobody would be here. But what John could be describing, I say, either could be a massive meteor shower, much smaller meteors, or, as Kimberly just mentioned, a rocket attack, missile attacks, and as you mentioned, I think Bruce pointed it out, that when Israel was being attacked by Iran, describe again what you said it looked like on TV.
Explosions in the sky.
You saw all these streaks of light,
Mm-hmm.
explosions, they had their iron
Yeah, and
dome
when they
going
knocked,
off.
and when you saw when they counteracted one,
Yeah,
it
they
would
blew
it
it
would
up.
blow, and you'd get all these little
Mhm.
like drops,
Like
you know?
fireworks.
Yeah,
And keeping in mind that from John's perspective, had John ever in his life ever seen anything like that before? Nothing like that had ever happened before. There were no explosives or rockets or missiles 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, they
So-
have to use their own terminology.
Yeah, so he had to use what terminology, what vocabulary he had to describe what he's seeing. But what he's describing to me sounds very much like a nuclear attack with just multiple countries going at it. And Christ himself said, what about, multiple countries? Remember it said nation would what?
Kingdom. Nation.
Yeah, nation would rise up against nation. There wouldn't be just this country and this country. It's going to be a world war, folks. All right, verse 14 says, "And the sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up. Every mountain and island were removed or moved out of their places." So you got either a massive earthquake, or massive atomic explosions, or both. I tend to believe probably both, because one of the things that we saw in verse 12, and that Jesus told us about, said there was a great earthquake. Verse 15 says, "The kings of the earth and great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains." Now, verse 15.
Is that the midpoint?
Actually, I think this is describing is basically Armageddon.
But isn't the midpoint when the Antichrist reveals himself that everyone runs for the hills to hide in the caves?
Well, the Jews will, but not everybody else.
Because the rest of them are all going to be worshiping the Antichrist.
Yeah, what you're thinking when it says that run for the hills, when Jesus said that when you see the abomination of desolation in the temple, declaring that he is God, said run for the hills. But who was Jesus speaking to when he said that?
The Jews.
The Jews.
Because that's where that's where the temple will be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
But the reason you see all of these kings and commanders and what have you, when in all of, I shouldn't even say history, I should say future history, because we're reading about the history of the future, which is really kind of a strange way to look at it, but that's what it is. This is the history of the future. When in all of the things we've read about in the Bible, is there going to be this massive gathering of armies and commanders and people that are all going to be making war together?
The final battle.
Yeah, Armageddon.
That's when Christ is going to be there.
Yeah.
And they think they're going to be fighting him.
Well, they're going to be going
Surprise.
against Jerusalem. Now, this is one of those things where John tells us the big picture and then goes back and fills in the details later. The breaking of the sixth seal is the big picture. as we get on into this, and by the way, all of chapter 7 is kind of a parenthesis where John says, well, wait a minute, I gotta tell you about this other thing here first. And then picking up with chapter 8, he goes on and continues the story. And as we get into this, you'll find that after John has laid out what the big picture is, he starts going in and filling in the details. This particular passage, especially verse 15, is a description of the big picture. The big picture is Armageddon. The details will tell us where it happens, when it happens, who all's involved in it. Ezekiel goes into a lot of detail about Armageddon. In fact, Ezekiel tells us about actually 2 great wars that are going to take place. So also keep in mind when we take a break and go back and pick up Ezekiel, there's 2 things Ezekiel talks about, but for our purposes right now, I believe John is describing here Armageddon at the very end of it. And one of the reasons, or I should say the biggest reason that I believe John is describing Armageddon is because when all of these things happen, it says they run for the hills. They hide. It's like, how can we hide? And who are they hiding from?
Jesus.
The Lamb. The wrath of the Lamb. Well, when is the wrath of the Lamb going to happen?
At the end.
At the second coming, at the very end of Armageddon. And I'll give you just a quick overview of that, and then we'll call it quits for tonight. And then we will pick up, let's see. Let me check my schedule here and see what are we going to tackle next. Okay, we are going to go ahead and tackle Revelation chapter 7 next. All right. In the chronological scheme of things, at the very end of the tribulation, the armies of the world are going to move against Israel. It's what they've been wanting to do for years. Well, it's finally going to happen, and we're told that there's going to be this great army from the north. And by the way, just as a quick geography lesson, does anybody know which major city is due north? I mean, you can draw a line on a map. What is due north of Jerusalem? Moscow. Absolutely. Well, the armies of the north, together with all of their allies, are going to move against Israel. They will defeat Israel, and they're going to be at the very outskirts of Jerusalem. The Bible tells us that Jerusalem will be on the verge of falling, and the Jews are going to basically be scared for their lives because they're going to know this is it. We are done. And at the very last moment, they are going to hear a trumpet sound, and they are going to look up, and they are going to see their Messiah coming in might through the heavens as the clouds spread apart. And of course, who is going to be following together with him? We are. An overwhelming army of angels and the church are going to be coming together with him. And it will be at that point, as they see Jesus destroying these armies that are about to overrun Jerusalem and to annihilate his people, when they see Christ intervening on their behalf, they will at that point. Now, we don't know why at this point they suddenly recognize him. We just know that they will. And suffice it to say, God can make it happen however he wants to. I'm not going to sit here and analyze how they recognize Christ. I just suffice it to say the Bible tells us they do. That they will look up as they see Jesus coming in the clouds and making war and annihilating these invading armies. And that as a nation, Israel will at that point get on their knees and declare Jesus is the Messiah. And they will, as a nation, finally, at the very end of it all, acknowledge that he is their Messiah, and the Jews will be saved at that point. Now, one last point. The Bible tells us that of those Jews that are going to be saved, that there's only going to be a remnant. We know that to be the case because if the armies that are coming against Israel, through Armageddon and this invasion of Israel, well, what's going to happen to the majority of Jews who don't live in Jerusalem?
They're all gonna die.
They're dead already. They've been annihilated. The only ones left are the Jews that are in Jerusalem. They're the remnant. And even the rabbis who have vehemently denounced Christ, those rabbis that see this coming, they're going to be on their knees declaring Jesus is the Messiah.
A lot of the Jews now are heading back to
They are.
Israel.
Yeah, the regathering has started. All right, questions this evening?